The snow started falling on a Monday. By Tuesday morning, it had buried the sidewalks outside Meridian Technologies headquarters in a clean, indifferent white, and Daniel Carter arrived at exactly 7:42. The same time he arrived every day, carrying a thermos of black coffee and a paper lunch bag folded neatly at the top. He wore the same charcoal wool coat he wore every winter. Not because he couldn't afford another one, because Emma had picked it out 2 years ago in a department store. Pressing her small palm flat against the fabric and saying, "This one, Dad, it makes you look important," and he hadn't been able to bring himself to replace it since. He took the stairs to the 3rd floor. Always the stairs. The elevator at Meridian was one of those glass-walled ones that faced the open-plan floor, and he had no interest in being visible longer than necessary. His desk sat in the far corner of the engineering department, half hidden behind a column and a potted plant that had seen better days. His monitor faced the wall. His headphones were on by 8 and off only when someone addressed him directly, which was not often, because his colleagues had learned through a series of gradually cooler responses and politely declined invitations that Daniel Carter was not interested in lunch runs, after-work drinks, fantasy football pools, or conversation for its own sake. "He's divorced," said Trevor Walsh from QA, who had a talent for announcing things he knew nothing about. Trevor said this to the 2 junior developers beside him as Daniel passed through the kitchen one morning without stopping. "Has to be. Nobody gets that sealed up without a reason. I heard he had some kind of breakdown," offered Priya Hendricks, though she looked uncertain even as she said it. Like, emotional. "He's just a snob," said the third one, whose name Daniel had never learned and had no intention of learning. None of them were right. None of them were even close. Olivia Grant arrived at Meridian at 8:15 most mornings, and when she walked through the lobby, the receptionist straightened and the junior project managers checked their posture without realizing they were doing it. She had that quality, the kind that rearranged a room before she'd spoken a word. She was 38. She had built Meridian from a 40-person startup into a company of 1,200, and she had done it with a particular brand of quiet ferocity that people tended to describe, depending on how well they knew her, as either visionary or cold. Both were partially accurate. Neither was the whole picture. She did not date. She had not, in any meaningful sense, dated in 4 years. Her assistant Madison had stopped trying to set her up after the 3rd politely catastrophic dinner. Her board members had learned to keep their comments about her personal life to a minimum after she had responded to one such comment. "You need someone, Olivia. Everyone needs someone," with a silence so complete that the man had actually apologized. She was not lonely, she told herself. She was focused. There was a difference. She first noticed Daniel Carter in the 3rd week of November. In the way you sometimes notice something that has always been in your peripheral vision, not for the first time, but for the first time with any real attention. She had been standing at the floor-to-ceiling window in her office, which looked down across the open engineering floor below, a habit she had when she was thinking through a problem and needed something neutral to rest her eyes on, and her eyes had rested on him. He was at his desk. He was not doing anything unusual. He was working, but there was something in the posture, the way he held himself slightly apart from the ambient noise of the floor, the economy of his movements, the way he opened the paper lunch bag at exactly 12 o'clock, with the same quiet ceremony every single day that made her look longer than she intended to. She noticed the lunch bag first. Small, carefully packed. A sandwich on one side. What looked like cut fruit in a little plastic container. A folded napkin on top. He packs his lunch like someone is watching, she thought. And then, immediately after. No. Like he's doing it for someone else. She didn't know why that distinction mattered to her. She moved away from the window, but she came back the next day, and the day after that. The other thing she noticed, and this one landed differently, in a place that had been quiet for a long time, was the departure. 5 o'clock, every single day. Not 5:03. Not 4:58. 5. He would save whatever he was working on. Close his laptop with both hands. Retrieve his coat from the hook behind his desk. Fold his headphones into their case. And be gone. People at Meridian did not leave at 5. The culture had never required them to stay late. Olivia had never believed in that particular performance of dedication, but they generally lingered. They had conversations that ran long. They finished things that didn't need finishing until tomorrow. They existed in the building past 5 because leaving on time still carried, in tech culture, a faint suggestion of not caring enough. Daniel Carter did not care about any of that. He left at 5. And one Thursday in late November, Olivia found herself not quite deliberately, not quite accidentally in the lobby at 10 minutes to 5. She told Madison she needed to make a call in the car. Madison accepted this without comment, as she accepted most things. Olivia was in the lobby when Daniel came down. He didn't see her. She was partly behind a concrete pillar, looking at her phone in a way that could plausibly be described as reading something important. He walked past her, and through the revolving door, and out into the gray afternoon. She followed at a distance that was just large enough to be explicable if questioned. He walked 4 blocks to the elementary school on Carver Street. She had passed that school 100 times in her car, and never once thought about it. He stood at the iron fence in the snow, his hands in his pockets, watching the door. And then the door opened, and a small girl in a red coat came running out, her backpack bouncing. And Daniel's face, his contained, unreadable, careful face, simply changed. It softened in a way that looked almost painful, like a muscle unclenching after a very long time. He crouched down and opened his arms, and the girl ran straight into them. Olivia stopped walking. She stood on the sidewalk in the snow, watching a man hold his daughter, and felt something move in her chest that she could not immediately name. Her father had waited for her at that exact iron fence. A different school, a different city. 30 years ago, but the same fence, the same posture, the same crouching down. He had always been there, every day, without exception, until the day he wasn't. Until the afternoon she ran out, and the face she found was not his but her uncle's. And she knew before he said a word. She turned around and walked back to the building. She did not call Madison. She sat in her office for 40 minutes looking at nothing. And then she opened her laptop and tried to remember what she had been working on before. She told herself she was simply paying appropriate attention to a member of her team. She was the CEO. It was reasonable to be curious about the people who worked for her. This was, she was aware, not entirely honest. She asked HR casually, in the context of a broader quarterly review she was conducting to pull Daniel Carter's file. He had been at Meridian for 2 years. Performance reviews were consistently strong, detail-oriented, reliable, technically excellent, described by his direct manager as someone who produces more than his title suggests, but actively avoids promotion discussions. He had declined 2 internal advancement conversations. The notes said he cited family commitments. She sat with that phrase for longer than made sense. She began, without quite deciding to change certain small habits that brought her into contact with the engineering floor more often than usual. She walked through it on her way to meetings she could have reached another way. She stopped at the kitchen when she knew it would be occupied by the morning crowd and not by the time Daniel arrived. Which was wrong. She stopped at the kitchen when she knew he was likely to be there, pouring his coffee before the day began. She watched him the way you watch something you're trying to understand. He was not unfriendly. When colleagues spoke to him, he answered directly and without hostility, but he offered nothing beyond what was asked. No small talk, no reciprocal inquiry. It was not rudeness. It was more like conservation, like a man who had calculated exactly how much energy he had and had already allocated all of it somewhere else. One morning she overheard him on the phone in the stairwell. She had pushed open the door on her way down and heard his voice before she saw him, quieter than usual, with a different register entirely. Was it the same one as yesterday? The left side? A pause. Okay. Tell the teacher I'll be there by noon if it's not better. No, I can do that. Don't worry, Em. Another pause, and then, very quietly, I know. Me too. Have a good morning. He hung up and turned and found her standing there, and for a moment his face was still open, still wearing that different expression, the one she'd seen at the school fence before it returned to its usual careful distance. Miss Grant, he said. Daniel. She hadn't meant to use his first name. Is everything all right? Yes. He held the door for her. My daughter had a headache. It's nothing. She wanted to say something and didn't know what it was. She went through the door he was holding. Thank you, she said. He nodded. They separated on the landing, without another word. She called a small team meeting 3 days later, a production review. Nothing unusual. 5 people around the table in one of the second-floor conference rooms. Daniel was included because the project in question was his. She watched him during the meeting. He was precise. He answered questions before they were fully asked. He had a way of finding the actual problem inside a problem that she recognized, because she did the same thing. She waited until the others were leaving. Daniel, she said. He stopped. The last of the others filtered out, and the door swung almost shut behind them. And she was aware that this was a strange thing she was about to do, and she did it anyway. Why won't you date? The question landed in the room, like something dropped from a height. He looked at her without alarm, which somehow made it worse. She had expected surprise, had steeled herself for discomfort, and his absolute steadiness in the face of the question made her feel exposed in a way she hadn't anticipated. That's a personal question, he said. His voice was even. I know. Why are you asking it? She didn't have a clean answer. Because people talk, she said finally. And none of what they say sounds right. Something shifted in him, very slightly. Not softening, exactly. More like acknowledgement. I don't date, he said, because I don't have the time or the interest. That's 2 reasons. People usually give 1. The corner of his mouth moved, fractionally. Miss Grant. Olivia. He paused. I should get back to work. Of course. She moved aside. He went through the door. She stood in the empty conference room for a moment, looking at the chair he'd been sitting in, and thought, there's something he's not saying. Not evasion, exactly. Not dishonesty. More like a locked door that he was under no obligation to open. She was not accustomed to locked doors. What she didn't see, what no one at Meridian saw, was 5:45 in the morning. That was when Daniel's day actually started. Not with coffee or email or any of the rhythms that the working world recognized as a beginning, but with the particular silence of a house that is asleep except for you, and the knowledge that there are exactly 4 things you need to accomplish before 7:30 or the whole day suffers. He made Emma's lunch first. Not because it was the most urgent task, but because it was the one he did best when he was still quiet inside, before the day had a chance to get complicated. He packed it the same way every time. Sandwich cut diagonally, because Emma had told him once that food tasted better when it was cut diagonally, and he had never had any reason to stop doing it. Apple slices with the seeds removed, a small container of crackers, a note on a folded square of paper. The notes were short. Sometimes they were jokes she had told him, and he wrote them back to her. Sometimes they were just, I'm proud of you. Love, Dad. He folded the paper into quarters and tucked it under the crackers. Then breakfast. Then Emma up at 6:30, negotiating the particular 7-year-old physics of getting dressed, while still, technically, asleep. Then hair. This was its own project, requiring patience he had built up over years, because Emma had her mother's hair, thick and curling, and he had learned through failure, and more failure, and YouTube videos, watched at 11 at night, how to braid it in a way she liked. He had learned a lot of things through failure after Claire died. He had learned to cook more than pasta. He had learned to talk to teachers and pediatricians and the one therapist Emma had seen for 8 months after, who had the patience and specificity that Daniel had needed someone to have. He had learned that grief in a 7-year-old did not look like adult grief. It looked like tantrums about nothing, like clinging, like sudden inexplicable brightness followed by storms. He had learned to ride all of it without flinching too visibly. He had learned, above everything else, to be present. Not in the motivational poster sense, in the actual sense. Here, in this room, looking at you, not somewhere else in my head. Claire had made him promise that, in the hospital, at the end. Not with those words, with something simpler, don't disappear on her. He had held her hand and said he wouldn't, and he had meant it with everything he was, and he had been keeping that promise ever since. The career cost of it was something he had thought about exactly once, and then decided not to think about again. Meridian had offered him a senior position 18 months ago. The salary difference was significant. The travel requirement was also significant, 2 weeks a month, sometimes more, and so the conversation had lasted approximately 3 minutes before he'd declined, and the HR manager had stared at him with an expression he recognized as someone trying to decide if they'd misheard. He hadn't misheard. He was also doing freelance work on the side. Infrastructure contracts, mostly remote. Mostly at night after Emma was asleep. Between the 2 jobs, he made enough. Enough had become, over the past 3 years, a word he trusted more than more. He did not feel sorry for himself about any of this. He wanted to be clear on that point, at least in his own internal accounting. This was not martyrdom. This was just what you did when you loved someone, and they needed you, and nothing in the world was more important than showing up. Emma knew he worked hard. She knew in the way children know things not through explicit information but through the texture of days, the fact of him always there. The way he sometimes fell asleep on the couch after she went to bed. One Saturday morning she had made him a card that said, "Best dad in the entire world." She was working on spelling, with a crayon drawing of the 2 of them that gave him approximately the same body type as a refrigerator. He had put it on the refrigerator. It had been there for 8 months. It was a Wednesday in December when Olivia called him into her office. Not the glass-walled conference rooms. Her actual office, on the executive floor, with the city view and the clean lines and the single orchid on the corner of her desk. That was the only personal object in the room. He had never been up there before. "Close the door," she said, not looking up from her screen. He closed it and stood near the door. "I have a project," she said. "It needs someone who can think structurally and doesn't need a lot of hand-holding." "Your manager says, that's you." "What kind of project?" She turned her screen toward him. He leaned in slightly, not coming closer, just adjusting his angle, and looked at the architecture diagram on the screen. It was a system migration proposal, ambitious and somewhat overplanned in ways that would cause problems in execution. He saw 3 of the problems immediately. "You're over-indexing on redundancy in the middle layer," he said. "It'll create latency issues you won't catch in testing but will notice immediately in production." She looked at him. "You got that in 10 seconds. It's a common pattern. Most of my senior architects missed it. Most of your senior architects are thinking about the presentation layer, because that's what gets noticed. This is a back-end problem." There was a pause. She tilted her head, just slightly. "The role I'm offering is temporary. 6 weeks, reporting directly to me. That would require staying late sometimes. I can't do that." She leaned back. "Why not? I have a daughter. I pick her up from school at 5:15, and I don't have backup arrangements that could cover consistent late evenings." She was quiet for a moment. He watched her think it was visible, the way she processed. A focused stillness that he recognized from his own internal experience of working through something complicated. "What if the arrangement had flexible hours?" she said. "Remote when needed. You work the extra hours in the morning or at night if the schedule requires." He hadn't expected that. He considered it. "I'd want that in writing," he said. "I'll have Madison draft it today." He nodded. He was almost at the door when she said, without looking up, "You must trust her a great deal." "Your daughter." He paused. "She trusts me," he said. "That's different." He went out. She looked at the closed door for a long moment. Her name was Margaret Ann Rourke before she became Olivia Grant, which was her mother's maiden name and the name she had taken at 22 when she incorporated her first company and decided, with the decisive finality she brought to most things, to start building something that had nothing to do with what she'd come from. What she'd come from was a house in western Pennsylvania, a mother who worked nights at a hospital, a father named Robert Rourke, who drove a delivery truck and came home at 4 in the afternoon smelling of diesel and cold air, and who was, and she had never said this out loud to anyone, the best person she had ever known. He was funny in a quiet way. He read constantly, history mostly, and he had this habit of leaving books face down on the kitchen counter with certain pages folded back, and when she was old enough she realized he was marking things for her to find. He never said, "Look at this," never made it instructional. He just left the pages open. She read everything he'd marked, and never told him. He waited for her at school, every day. Without exception, she didn't know until she was older that this was not a given, that other fathers worked long hours or traveled or simply weren't there because her father always was. 5 days a week, in all weather, at the iron fence, with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the particular expression of a man who has been looking forward to something. He died when she was 13. Heart attack, sudden. The kind that gives no warning and allows no preparation. She came out of school on an ordinary Tuesday, and her uncle was at the fence. Her uncle, not her father, and the wrongness of it registered before any specific thought did, in the body, the way the deepest shocks always arrive first. She had never stopped missing him. She had organized her entire life around the project of not stopping, which looked from the outside like success, and from the inside like motion, if you kept moving fast enough. The missing had less surface area to land on. She had built a company. She had built a reputation. She had built, floor by floor, the particular architecture of a person who appears entirely self-sufficient, and she had maintained it well, and mostly she believed it herself. The problem with self-sufficiency, she had come to understand in the past few years, in the quiet hours, that success does not actually eliminate, only rearrange, was that it was also a kind of hunger, not for someone to complete her. She did not believe in that formulation, but for someone to witness, for the specific comfort of existing in a room with another person who is genuinely glad you are there. She had not had that in a long time. She had looked at Daniel Carter on that sidewalk in November and felt, for the first time in longer than she could calculate, completely still. Not comforted, she didn't know him well enough for that, but arrested, stopped in motion, reminded of something she had been walking away from for 25 years, and which had apparently been waiting patiently for her to stop long enough to find it again. She did not tell Daniel any of this. She was not in the habit of telling anyone, but she began, over the weeks of the project, to understand something about him that she hadn't expected. He was observant in the same way she was. Not surveillance, just attention, the same quality of noticing things that most people let pass, of filing them, of returning to them later. He noticed when she hadn't eaten. He didn't say anything about it directly. He wasn't that kind of person, but twice he had appeared at her office door with a coffee and a something from the kitchen and set it at the edge of her desk with the same quiet efficiency he applied to everything, and been gone before she'd thought to respond. She noticed when he was worried about Emma. He showed it in the same way she showed everything, almost not at all, just a slight compression, a check of his phone under the desk when he thought no one was looking. "Everything all right?" she said once, across the conference table. "My daughter's got a cough," he said, not looking up from the document. "I left medication with the school nurse." "It's fine," she said nothing. He looked up after a moment and met her eyes. And there was something in the exchange that neither of them named. The crisis hit on a Thursday afternoon. They were in the middle of a critical review session, Daniel, Olivia, and 2 system architects from the senior team, when his phone buzzed. He silenced it. It buzzed again 30 seconds later. He glanced at the screen, and something in his face changed. "I need to step out," he said. The architects looked at each other. This was Olivia's meeting. Nobody stepped out of Olivia's meetings. 5 minutes, Olivia said, neutrally. He was already at the door. He was gone for longer than 5 minutes. When he came back, his coat was already on, and he had the quality of a man moving through necessary motions toward something more urgent. "I have to go," he said. "Emma fell on the playground. She's at the nurse's office." "How bad?" "She's okay. Probably. They think her wrist might be sprained. I need to go." "Of course," Olivia said. He was gone. The architects looked at Olivia. She looked at the architecture diagram on the screen and said, "Let's take the 15-minute break. We were planning anyway," and walked out before anyone could respond. She was not following him again. She was getting her coat because the afternoon had turned cold, and she had a car service pickup in 40 minutes. And she told herself this. Clearly, she needed air. She did not take her usual exit. She was aware, without quite deciding, that she was walking in the direction of Carver Street. She arrived at the school as Daniel was coming out the front entrance with Emma pressed against his side. The girl's right arm was against her chest and her face was tear-stained. But she was not crying now, just leaning into her father with the full weight of someone who has reached the safest place they know. Daniel was talking to her, low and steady. Olivia couldn't hear it from where she stood. His right arm was around Emma's shoulders, and his left hand held both their bags, and he was moving carefully, calibrating his pace to hers, checking her face every few steps. He hadn't seen Olivia. She was standing at the corner, perhaps 30 feet away, and he was focused entirely on his daughter. Emma said something, and Daniel stopped walking. He crouched down the same movement she'd seen from this same street in November, and looked Emma directly in the face and said something. Emma nodded. Daniel touched her cheek with the back of his fingers, just once, checking. Then he picked up both bags with one hand, and stood, and they kept walking. Olivia stood at the corner in the December cold, and felt the grief move through her as cleanly and completely as it had when she was 13 years old, and she did not try to stop it. She let it move. She stood there until they had turned the corner and were gone. And then, she stood there a little longer. Don't disappear on her. She didn't know where that phrase came from. She hadn't heard it anywhere, but she thought it, standing in the snow, and knew it was exactly what she had just watched. She walked back. She did not cry. She was Olivia Grant, and she almost never cried. But her eyes were bright when she got back to the building, and Madison, who noticed everything and said very little, handed her a coffee without being asked, and went back to her work. 2 weeks before Christmas, she asked him. It was evening. They had both stayed late. He had arranged to have Emma stay with a neighbor he trusted, a retired teacher named Joan, who lived 2 blocks away and occasionally collected Emma when logistics required it. This happened rarely. He had not mentioned it to Olivia. She discovered it only because he had stayed past 5 and she'd noticed. They were alone on the executive floor. The rest of the building had emptied. The city was lit below them in the dark, and it had started to snow again. The soft kind that landed without sound. "Tell me about your wife," she said. He didn't recoil from it. He looked at his coffee cup, and then at the window. "Claire," he said. "Her name was Claire. How long were you married?" 6 years. Emma was 4 when she got sick. She lived about 18 months after diagnosis. He said it steadily, without particular inflection. The way you say things you have said to yourself so many times that they've become simply true, stripped of the drama that first surrounded them. "I'm sorry," Olivia said. He nodded. "The promotion," she said, "the one you turned down 18 months ago. You could have a very different situation right now." "I know. Does that bother you?" He thought about it genuinely, which she appreciated. She could tell when someone was considering a question versus manufacturing an answer. "No," he said. "I made the trade I wanted to make. Most people don't see it as a trade. They see it as a sacrifice. Most people haven't sat with a dying person and thought about what they'd wish they'd done differently." He said it without bitterness, just statement. "The answer, for me, was pretty simple. I'd wish I'd been there more, so I started being there more." She was quiet for a moment. "You could have a better life," she said. "Professionally, financially. There are opportunities, Miss Grant." Something warm and faintly amused moved through his expression. "I already do." She looked at him. "Have a better life," he said, quietly. "Emma thinks the apple slices in her lunch are a special treat. She told her class at Show and Tell that her dad makes the best braids in the 2nd grade. He smiled, and it was the unguarded version she had only glimpsed before, the one that changed the whole geometry of his face. "I'm not missing anything that matters." Olivia looked away. The city lights blurred slightly. "You're unusual," she said, and meant it differently than it sounded. "I'm ordinary," he said. "I just know what I'm doing it for." Christmas came and went. The project concluded in the 2nd week of January. Daniel submitted his final documentation, clean and complete, and 2 days ahead of schedule, and returned to the 3rd floor and his corner desk and his headphones. Things went back to what they'd been before, which was to say, he was there, and she knew he was there. And nothing between them was different, except that something was completely different. She found herself looking at the window more than usual. She asked Madison, one afternoon, what she knew about single parents casually, framing it as something related to a company benefits review she was actually conducting, which was not entirely untrue. Madison was a mother of two, and had a practical intelligence Olivia relied on more than she acknowledged. "It's relentless," Madison said. "The planning. Every single thing has to be planned, or it falls apart. And the loneliness of it." She paused. "Not that they'd say that. Usually, but it's there, even if they prefer it?" Madison gave her a look that was kind and somewhat knowing. "Preferring something and not being lonely are not the same thing, Olivia." Olivia let the subject drop. But the loneliness, she thought about that. She thought about the freelance work he was doing at night, after Emma went to sleep, in the quiet of a house where there was no one to talk to. She thought about the careful self-containment of him, not coldness, she understood now. But management, the specific management of a person who has calibrated how much they can give and has given it all to one place. She went down to the 3rd floor on a Tuesday morning in late January. Not for a meeting. Not for a walkthrough. She walked to his desk and stood next to it, and he looked up from his screen. "Are you busy?" she said, moderately. He waited. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to give me an honest answer." He held her gaze. "All right. If someone hypothetically cared about you, genuinely, not as a project or a problem to solve, just cared, would that change anything?" He was quiet for a long moment. The floor hummed around them, keyboards, distant conversation, the HVAC system. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because I'm trying to understand whether the door is closed or whether it just looks closed." He looked down at his keyboard, then back at her. "It's not closed," he said carefully. "It's locked from the inside for a reason." "What's the reason?" He was quiet again. And then he said it, the thing she had sensed all along. The sentence that had been sitting at the center of everything, like a stone in still water. "Because I promised my daughter," he said, "that no one will ever replace her mother." The engineering floor continued around them, completely indifferent. Olivia stood very still. "I made her that promise when Claire died," he said. "Emma was 4. She asked me if I was going to get a new mom, and I told her that her mom was irreplaceable. And I meant it. And I still mean it." He paused. "So no, that door doesn't open because someone cares. It opens if it opens only if I'm absolutely certain that what walks through it isn't trying to replace something. Because Emma's been through enough loss." Olivia looked at him for a long time. "That's not a closed door," she said quietly. "That's a very specific requirement." He said nothing. But he was watching her with something she hadn't seen before, a kind of guarded attention. Careful and real. She walked away. She did not call him. She did not manufacture a reason to meet. She did not assign him to another project, or find a pretext to appear at his desk. What she did was smaller, more considered. She started with Emma. It happened because of the Valentine's Day card drive, one of those company charity initiatives that someone in HR organized every February, collecting cards for kids in the hospital pediatric ward. A basket appeared in the lobby for handmade cards. Olivia had never participated before, not because she objected to the idea, but because she operated on a different altitude from the human-sized gestures of office life. This February, she found herself buying a box of craft supplies on her lunch break. She took them home and sat at her kitchen table. A kitchen table that she rarely actually sat at, and made 4 cards. They were not sophisticated. She was better at systems architecture than watercolors. But she made them carefully, and she put them in the basket, and she did not tell anyone. She happened to mention the drive to Daniel, in passing, the next morning. She wasn't sure why. He said Emma would want to contribute. That she loved that kind of thing. And did Olivia think it would be all right to bring some homemade cards from a 7-year-old who wasn't an employee? "Of course," Olivia said. The cards appeared the following Thursday. They were spectacular explosions of sticker and glitter and crayon, each one featuring a character labeled in determined handwriting as a friend who is sick. Olivia found herself standing at the basket for longer than she meant to. Reading them, she wrote a note and left it on Daniel's desk. It said only, "Emma's cards are the best ones. She's very good at this." He found the note at lunch. He read it. He folded it and put it in his coat pocket. He didn't say anything about it. But the next morning, there was a coffee on the corner of her desk when she arrived, alongside a small stack of crackers in a little plastic container. She looked at it for a long moment. She ate the crackers. Spring came. Not dramatically, this was late winter becoming early spring in the incremental northern way, a degree at a time. The snow retreating reluctantly from the edges of things. But it came. On a Friday in March, Daniel was working late, one of the flexible arrangements that had survived even after the project concluded, because his manager had found that his output in the morning hours was worth adjusting around when Emma arrived. Joan had a doctor's appointment. The backup plan had backed up. He'd explained the situation to his manager, and it had been handled with the quiet efficiency that good management allowed. Emma came in with her backpack and her library book and settled into the small conference room he'd arranged access to, and she did her homework at the table with the focused seriousness of a child who understood that this was grown-up space and behaved accordingly. Olivia walked past the conference room on her way to her own late evening and saw, through the glass, a small girl with thick braided hair drawing something in a notebook with absolute concentration. She stopped. She looked through the glass for a moment, and then she knocked. Emma looked up. Olivia opened the door. "Hi," she said. "I work here too. Are you waiting for your dad?" Emma assessed her with the candid, undefended directness of children. "Yeah." He said, "I could draw in here." "That's a good drawing," Olivia said, though she could only see the edge of it. "What is it?" "A house," Emma said. "But better than a regular house. It has a slide instead of stairs." "That is better," Olivia agreed. Emma considered this response and found it acceptable. "Do you want to sit down?" she said. Olivia looked at the child and at the empty chair across the table and felt something in her chest that was simultaneously very simple and not simple at all. "For a minute," she said. "Sure." She sat down. Emma went back to her drawing. They were quiet together, and it was the most comfortable Olivia had felt in a room with another person in longer than she could accurately remember. "What's your name?" Emma said, without looking up. "Olivia. That's a pretty name. Still drawing." "My dad talks about you sometimes." Olivia was very still. "What does he say?" Emma looked up. "He says you're really smart, but you work too much." She considered. "He says that's because you're scared of something. But he doesn't know what." The room was quiet. "He said that?" Olivia said. "Yeah." Emma went back to the slide house. "Dad usually knows stuff like that. He's really good at noticing." Daniel appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later and stopped when he saw Olivia. She looked up. Their eyes met across the table, across his daughter, who was now explaining to Olivia in detail why a slide was structurally superior to a staircase for purposes of morning efficiency. "I hope this is okay," Olivia said. He looked at Emma. Emma was demonstrating the slide angle with her pencil. "It's okay," he said. He sat in the third chair at the table, and Emma included him back into the conversation with the seamless ease of a child who has never needed to manage the territory between adults because the adults in her world have always managed it without her. They sat like that for a while, the three of them, in the quiet conference room with the city going dark outside the window. It was a Wednesday evening in April, the first real spring evening. The kind where the air finally smells like something other than cold when Emma looked up from her dinner and said, without particular preamble, "Dad, do you think Mom would like Olivia?" Daniel put down his fork. Emma was looking at him with the direct, measuring look that she had gotten from Claire, and that still sometimes caught him off guard with its accuracy. He thought about Claire. He thought about who she was: practical and funny and deeply allergic to sentimentality. A woman who had once told him that the best thing he could do for their daughter was to show her that love was not something that ran out. He thought about what she had actually said to him at the end, which was not no one else, ever, but was instead, "Don't be afraid. Don't let Emma be afraid." He had heard it the first way for 3 years because it was easier. "I think," he said carefully, "that Mom would want us to be happy." Emma considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I think she would like her," Emma said, returning to her food. "Olivia is kind of serious, but she eats the crackers. Mom always said you could tell about people by whether they eat what you give them." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "She does eat the crackers." Emma nodded, as though this settled something. Daniel looked at his plate. The April light came through the kitchen window, and the tree outside was doing the particular thing it did every spring, coming back, tentatively, in the careful way that things that have been through winter learn to come back. He thought about the door he'd described to Olivia in January, locked from the inside. He thought about what it actually meant for a door to be locked from the inside, which was that he was the one holding the key, and that he was the only one with the authority to decide. He thought, "She sat with my daughter in that conference room for 20 minutes and just let her talk about slides." He thought, "She left crackers on my desk." He thought about what Claire had actually said. He texted Olivia at 9 o'clock, after Emma was asleep. He had never texted her personally before. He held the phone for a while first. "Emma thinks her mother would have liked you," he wrote. "I thought you should know." He almost deleted it. He sent it. 3 minutes passed. "She told me her name," Olivia wrote back. "The day she first talked to me. She said, 'My mom was Claire, and she died, and she was the most beautiful person. She wanted me to know.'" Daniel read this twice. "She does that," he wrote. "She makes sure people know. She's remarkable," Olivia wrote. "She's so much like you." He sat with that for a moment. "I wanted to ask you something," he wrote finally. "There's a trail by the reservoir that Emma likes. She's been asking to go on Saturday. If you wanted to come, not as anything particular, just a walk. Just the 3 of us." He waited. "Yes," Olivia wrote. "I'd like that." He set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood for a moment in the quiet of the house. The refrigerator hummed. The crayon drawing of the 2 of them, still approximately refrigerator-shaped, caught the light from the hall. He thought about Claire. He let himself think about her clearly, fully, without the careful management he'd built up around it. He thought about her face and her laugh, and the way she had said "don't disappear" on her, and the other thing she had said, the thing he'd been less ready to hear. "And don't disappear yourself." He had gotten one of those right. He was working on the other one. Saturday was clear and cold and brilliant. Emma ran ahead on the trail in her yellow boots, narrating something, a story she was making up as she walked, elaborate and recursive in the way children's stories were, full of details that mattered only to her, and therefore mattered enormously. The protagonist was a girl who could talk to trees. The trees gave her advice that was mostly practical. Olivia walked beside Daniel at the pace the path required, which was moderate and unhurried. And they talked sometimes and were quiet sometimes, and both things felt equally natural. She had not known that quiet could feel like company. She had always filled it with work or thought or forward motion. Walking beside this particular person, in the cold April light, the quiet felt like something it was safe to live inside. At one point, Emma slipped on a wet patch of stone, and Daniel's hand shot out instinctively, and Emma grabbed it and righted herself, and kept going without breaking the narrative thread of her story. Olivia watched it happen, the reflex of it, the muscle memory of constant low-grade vigilance, and thought, "This is what it looks like. Not sacrifice. Just attention. Just being there." The trail was not crowded, but it was not empty. Other families moved through it. Other configurations of people and children and dogs. Olivia watched them with more interest than she usually paid to strangers, and understood that she was looking for something for what this kind of ordinary looked like from the outside, now that she was beginning to understand it from somewhere closer to the inside. "She talks a lot," Daniel said, nodding toward Emma. "She's wonderful," Olivia said. He looked at her. She was looking at Emma, who was now examining something at the base of a tree with forensic intensity. "I'm not going to pretend this is simple," he said. "It isn't. There are rules about how this works, and some of them are Emma's and some of them are mine and some of them I haven't figured out yet." "I'm not looking for simple," Olivia said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "You're looking for real." She looked at him. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Maybe," he said. "We can try." Slowly, she thought about her father at the iron fence in the snow. She thought about a 13-year-old girl whose life had divided cleanly into before and after, and who had spent 25 years running fast enough that the after couldn't quite catch up. She thought about a conference room and crackers, and a 7-year-old talking about slides. "Slowly is good," she said. Emma came running back from the tree with something she'd found, a stone, interesting shaped, holding it up for evaluation. They both looked at it. Daniel pronounced it excellent. Olivia agreed. Emma put it in her jacket pocket with the gravity of someone securing something valuable and ran ahead again. Daniel and Olivia walked on. The trail curved ahead of them, still going, the light coming through the early spring trees in long, uneven shafts, falling on everything the same way, on the old, on the healing, on the things that were just, carefully, beginning. Emma had gotten far enough ahead that her yellow coat was a small bright point moving through the trees, and Daniel tracked it with the particular peripheral awareness he always carried, and Olivia walked beside him and let herself be present in it, not managing it, not analyzing it, just present. This, she thought, this is the thing she had been moving too fast to reach, not replacing, not erasing, just continuing, just choosing, day by day, the particular and difficult courage of staying present for the people who need it and for yourself.